you may want to make sure whatever AI get deployed in your organization is explainable. If something goes wrong, I can go back and look at which specific part went
Where
wrong.
how AI can actually solve it, maybe even beyond what you thought, or maybe it's even going to solve a problem you did not even realize you have.
First of all, AI needs to understand who is Rahul Mahajan. It cannot answer this question. No way AI
The
can answer.
context has to be there. Yeah.
The context has to be there. Exactly. How do I improve efficiency? How do I automate certain things? How do I make things smart? To me, my favorite one is personalization. That's my favorite one. How can I improve the experience?
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Our Own Devices. As has been our sort of series this time, that we are now going deeper and deeper into AI and the different aspects of AI, beyond the superficial. Um, we have with us Rahul Mahajan, who is CTO of Nagarro. For those who don't know, Nagarro is one company you should know about. It's an Indian company that literally has a global footprint and has global impact. So before we start the chat, Rahul, if you could just explain what does Nagarro do exactly, and I'm sure people don't realize how big a company this is.
So first of all, thank you, and I appreciate welcoming me. Nagarro is a very interesting organization. We are in the business for long, almost close to 3 decades now. Uh, Pretty much still we feel like a startup and a mid-size. We are a listed organization in Frankfurt among the tech companies. We are among the fastest growing companies in our segments. Um, Roughly around 18,000 people globally spread out, and largely the focus is on digital engineering, including integration related stuff, including creating innovative digital solutions for some of our large clients, but largely custom services engineering company in the ID space. So that's what we do, and we are kind of known for kind of getting pulled in when there is a very complex engineering kind of a problem, fast moving problem. Uh, so that those are the scenarios typically client love to pull us in for modern transformation kind of solutions. So those are scenarios we typically get involved, and that's a little bit about us. We are globally spread out. We have offices in different parts, including Europe, in India, in US, in Middle East, and different parts of Asia. And we are fairly diversified from an industry coverage point of view. We work all the way from some amazing airline company to some sports cars companies in Europe to some of the biggest e-commerce companies on this planet to fashion, apparel, CPG. So fairly diversified from an industry footprint point of view.
If I can start by asking you at a concept level, I've seen everybody talks about LLMs, but there is also the concept of a small language model, not just a large language model. And is there a way that you deploy it differently? Like there are certain cases where you use a small language model and maybe certain cases where you use a large language model. How do you differentiate?
Sure. So let me a little bit step back, and I'll answer your the specific question on small language models. So a little bit about for folks, for the viewers who may need a little bit of context with this. And interestingly, I was in States just 2 days back. So came yesterday morning, and had series of conversations in Europe, in US, in different parts of US with CXOs. Why I'm talking about this is because it's very close to the question that you have asked. And a lot of conversations were in the space of, I was talking to different industries, telecom and so on. And some of these conversations were on the innovations in generative AI. How people, CXOs were still in some cases fairly still trying to figure out what's their large language model or language model strategy. Some of them were still skeptical if it's gonna work, if it's gonna be still flaky, is it gonna hallucinate? What happens if it hallucinates, and so on. Uh, and is it going to be just a chatbot? So are we still talking about a chatbot, or are we talking about something which is super innovative and super different from what folks have seen? And interestingly, just to end up my previous point, interestingly, some of the solutions in generative AI that we showed were, at least the feedback that we heard, in two lines. One of the CEOs said, "It's too good if you can make it work." So that was kind of a validation in some ways, and obviously from an engineering perspective, that's our bread and butter. So we are fairly confident on the engineering parts. So that was one of the feedbacks. And second feedback which came in was that on the generative AI and specifically on the large language model, just make sure it's something which is safe, and whatever you're showing me, Rahul, is amazing and top class. Some of the agentic workflows that you're showing, these are something what we haven't seen. We have mostly been shown by other companies, some standard chatbots and stuff. But what we are now looking at least from the solutions that Nagarro is showing, are 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 very different. So just make sure the necessary governance elements, hallucination elements are taken care. Because if it gets deployed for these kinds of use cases, it's going to have a large impact on where we operate. Uh, a little bit of that to start the conversation. But now, when we talk about large language models or language models, we do have choices. We have choices all the way from open source. Meta released a new Llama model, Llama 3.x, which has, I think, close to 400 million parameters. Uh, that's one. Before that, there have been previous iterations of Llama and several other open source models. Then we have uh, open AIs of the world and Geminis from Google of the world, which are more of paid ones, as we all know, and they are deployed in Google Vertex and Azure AI workspaces and so on. Uh, Now, when it comes to language model, these are the initial choices. But I think the question which you are kind of asking is very interesting. Does everyone needs to embark on a large language model, or are there choices around SLM, small language models? Uh, we can break this into two parts. Essentially, what the company is trying to do. If essentially what the company is trying to do is I think maybe two or three parts, if you allow me. One is if you are essentially trying to just understand language and do some analysis like the classical NLPs of the world. NLP stands for natural language processing, where at least we can understand some basic insights like sentiments and intent and stuff like that. And most of the chatbots that we used to see like 2 years or 3 years back were largely around NLP based intent interpretation and so on. So that's one category of scenarios where you can actually go and use a simpler model. Now, even for modern use cases, we do have an option of using small language models uh, versus a large language model. Obviously, large language model comes with its own maturity and stuff like that, but it also comes with its own cost elements and other kind of hallucination related risk and stuff like that. Uh, with small language model, there is a certain level of pros and cons. We have seen that they are obviously more cost efficient, infrastructure efficient, and so on. That's point number one. Second, we have also seen in some of our implementations that you have much more control on the outcomes of what comes out of SLM. Uh, Hence, you can with and if company infrastructure has strong capabilities to put guardrails in terms of validating the output. In technical terms, there are various programmatic ways you can do that using RAG. RAG stands for retrieval augmented generation. And so there are various ways you can validate the outcomes through programmatic ways, through RAG ways, through query retrievals, searching, going and looking up databases and stuff like that. So if company has a strong infrastructure of this kind of first party data infrastructure for this kind of stuff, including to do enough grounding even before response comes, then yes, a small language model can help you at least navigate the basic responses in a very controlled way. It also still has the capability to do certain workflows and agentic workflows. But for all practical purposes, large language models So depending on the nature of use case, if your use case is initially around responding in textual format, you have choices. If you also are kind of the new age use cases, at least the ones that we are now building this year, are more agentic, more workflow driven, more connected to existing AI and applied AI side of the that those are the scenarios where we're using agent workflows. And agent workflows, those kind of capabilities are generally more explainable on large language models. Given the amount of training that they have gone through, amount of flexibility that they have. So yeah, depending on your scenario and your context and use case and industry and how regulatory you are, how much guardrails you need, you do have choices. And you don't need, everyone doesn't need to go to OpenAI or Google Vertex, Gemini's, those kind of expensive models.
And is that also a cost consideration that comes into play? Because we know AI in itself, is expensive, and so is scale going to help you, with the cost, or is it the choice? Is it this choice that you make of what kind of a language model you're going to deploy, depending on the kind of problem that you have? Is that also going to help you with regulating the costs?
I think you bring a very, very important point. The cost part is, first of all, kind of something which one cannot overlook. Otherwise, the cost can easily go out of control. So there are several parts to managing the cost. And also, to your question in terms of your decision making in terms of what's the right model, which also impacts can help you optimize the cost part. But there are several layers to cost. Uh, Layer number one, for example, one could think of is amount of cost it takes to even make the model ready or train or making the data infrastructure ready. So that's in some ways you can call that your sandbox cost or preparation cost or warming up boot up cost. So that's part number one. Second is obviously the license fee and the fee that you pay to the provider. Now, if you are working on a open source, you are still paying the infrastructure cost. So in some ways, it's myth that open source models are gonna be way cheaper as compared to the commercial ones. You still have to host them, you still have to train them, you still have to make sure you're updating them, you're securing them. So there's bunch of uh, infrastructure elements which may not be upfront apparent. Uh, so that's the second layer of the cost, the infrastructure or the license, depending on what's your model. Uh, no, and there are other layers of this cost. I'll try to limit my answer, but uh, now when it comes to cost saving, there are some amazing techniques today which are available. First and foremost, avoid frequent hops to the actual APIs. Why do you need to go every time to the API? Can we not build a kind of a knowledge graph? And by the way, that's a pattern that we strongly recommend, and we also specialize in. In fact, we are filing. We have kind of very close to filing a patent. So Nagarro has a their own technology accelerator, which we call as Genome AI. Essentially, one of the elements of benefits of using Genome AI is we build a very strong knowledge graphs to store the outcomes. So whenever there is a need to for us to go and look up, get a response to an LLM engine, we use this knowledge graph for two purposes. One, we use knowledge graph for initial grounding, initial RAGs. So even RAG, which is used to make sure the output, whenever it comes out, it's in line with the initial ask. So that's point number one, where these knowledge graphs are super declarative. You could actually use vector databases or embeddings and stuff like that, which is also fine. All boils down to how explainable from an enterprise strategy you want. So now you are running a large organization, you are taking financial decisions, you are taking planning decisions, you are taking workforce decisions and supply chain decisions and then stuff like that. You may want to make sure whatever AI get deployed in your organization is explainable. If something goes wrong, I can go back and look at which specific part went
Where,
wrong,
yeah.
and go and replace that specific part. It's okay in some cases for it to be wrong until at least in the initial stages. So, but what's very important is we go back and we are able to trace back to the right root cause. So explainability is a huge design principle in a lot of our CXO conversations when we are setting up these platforms. We do ask what are the design principles that you want to uh, tell us when we are setting up or architecting these platforms. And one of the most common ones which we hear and even we advise is explainability. So knowledge graphs, going back to genome, AI, and the knowledge graph component of it, layer of it, it's a very, very declarative data structure. The graph itself is, first of all, something what AI loves. It's an AI first data structure. You can always do standard RDBMSs or NoSQLs. Those are fine, but the world has moved on. We need more declarative data structures. We need more order one query friendly data structures. So if I can go and specifically go in the knowledge graph, for example, to your cost question, let's say Rahul Mahajan asks, what are what and this could be an enterprise HR system, for example, and I could ask, uh, what are my deliverables that are due on a specific on my vacation days. Now, this is a complicated question. First of all, AI needs to understand who is Rahul Mahajan. It cannot answer this question. No way AI
The
can answer.
context has to be there. Yeah.
The context has to be there. Exactly. It needs to know what is Rahul Mahajan talking about. First of all, it needs to know what's Rahul Mahajan. Second, it needs to know what are the vacation days for Rahul Mahajan. When is he planning vacation? So somewhere it has to figure out, okay, in coming next 1 month, there are 3 vacation days planned and so on. And so on. So it needs to be kind of warmed up or grounded. We call it grounding with necessary knowledge graph. Now I can go and look up in 10 HR databases, Oracle databases, and so on to figure out and join 10 columns, sorry, 10 tables and so on. Or even I can go in a NoSQL database and do some lookup. But what if I just go and in a data structure where I go to the Rahul, and with Rahul is an association around vacation. This is an order one retrieval. And this is an order one retrieval, and it's very, very AI friendly. Now that's where knowledge graphs come in. They help you do these kinds of order one retrievals. And this, by the way, also minimizes your cost, because if you can do grounding fast, your computation cost for RAG goes down. If you go and look up through in your fine tuning databases or vector databases, 20 documents where Rahul Mahajan's data is sitting, that's still expensive. So you will end up doing a lot of cost. So yeah, just to finish my response quickly, effective RAG techniques, effective training techniques, caching techniques when it comes to even deciding whether or not to even hit knowledge graphs. If they have already been queried in past for these similar kinds of questions, again, knowledge graphs are very effective. Those are scenarios where we kind of use these techniques to minimize the cost part of it. Because if every time you go and start asking the core API 20 questions, it's a waste
Yeah,
of
it's going to take you. If I can ask you one last question, a lot of the understanding of AI is relatively new. So let's say and as a company, you must be talking to many different organizations. They have their own unique problems. What the solution for this problem is based on our understanding of existing technology. How AI can actually solve it, maybe even beyond what you thought, or maybe it's even going to solve a problem you did not even realize you have. Is that something that you actually work with companies with? So is there an awareness level that you bring in when you have a consultation with a company on what you are going to help them with? Because again, you're dealing with a technology that's very new and it's still evolving, but the understanding is not there on what all it can be used for, right?
Absolutely, and glad you brought this point. It's a very, very nice question. Part of our conversation starts in a lot of cases. There are companies which come and say there is a specific problem, and
Just do
if they
this.
just do this, and we do
Yeah.
that. That's what they
Yeah.
are. But there are a lot of CXOs who come and ask, it's changing so fast. Can you advise us on even on the art of possible? To your question,
Yeah.
our step number one, whenever we are allowed, is to do a necessary consultative exercise. We call it within Nagarro thinking breakthroughs. Um, Part of that is to essentially articulate art of possible. How do you articulate art of possible? There are several ways you can do it. Typically, what I personally love is breaking the entire company into a value chain. So if there is a value chain of sorts, let's say you're talking to a CPG company. The CPG company would do initial supplier sourcing, would do manufacturing, would do store the stuff in warehouses, post production, do the necessary sales and distributions to the dealer, and then eventually take it to direct to consumer through the retailers, through their own dot coms, through marketplaces, through variety of ways. Now that's a value chain. Can I, across the value chain, start thinking of certain imperatives? Imperatives could be, how do I improve efficiency? How do I automate certain things? How do I make things smart? How do I, to me, my favorite one is personalization. That's my favorite one. How can I improve the experience at each of these stages? And each of the stages, personas are going to be different. There's going to be a supplier persona in the sourcing stage, or a procurement persona in the sourcing stage. In the manufacturing, you can imagine similarly sales, distribution, dealers, and end consumers. So personas is also going to. So now we have a value chain, we have a personas, and across the persona, then we start thinking about day in life, what kind of users they have, and now that's where we start bringing the personalization elements, automation elements, and art of possible start appearing in front of us. Obviously we understand technology, we understand what can work, what may not work, uh, how effective it is, what's the short term versus long term view. One which is very very important is and then that's something which I advocate very strongly, given my role is also not just as a CTO, but I also had a digital business unit. And within digital business unit, one of the things we do is transformation consulting. And the element of transformation consulting is not just do tech modernization just for the sake of modernization. Yes, we do modernization because a license is getting out of life, or something needs to be replaced, or we need to move it to cloud. But also think it from an ROI lens, also think it from a value lens. What's the value to the business? What's the value to the marketing guy? What's the value to the salesperson? What's the value to the dealer? So connected to the values KPIs. So now you have a value chain of sorts. You have personas of sorts. You have KPIs of sorts. And now you can start thinking this with this as a framework. You can start thinking and breaking down subparts into AI specific art of possible. Now, when it comes to, for example, sales in GTM, just as an example, sales in GTM, let's say, maybe that was the fourth step in the value chain in the order that I said. Can I make sales trade planners smart? Can I tell trade planners what promotion to do given the inventory that they are looking at, given the consumer profile that B2B consumer profile that they're looking at, given the seasonality, given the competitive elements, can I in real time tell the exact offer, exact bundle, exact marketing campaign? And this is what we call as AI playbooks. So on Geno, we are also kind of creating these AI playbooks, AI playbook for sales, AI
Yeah.
playbook for experience, and so on.
Rahul, fascinating conversation. I think we could have gone on and gone into real depth, but I think we'll come back to you maybe with more detailed questions on how AI is tackling the problem. And I'm sure even if this conversation happens a few weeks from now, we will have it would have changed so much because of the nature of this technology. So thanks for being on the show, Rahul.
Thanks for inviting me, and it will be a pleasure to talk to you again. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah. Yeah. So you are listening to Our Own Devices. We'll be back again next week with another guest. Till then, we are available everywhere you listen to your pods.